Matteo, it is so good to finally be able to do this. You're one of the busiest people I know, so I really appreciate you carving out some time to talk to me.
Thank you, John. It's been such a pleasure to be here today. I am, we've met a few years back, and I'm busy, and it has been a very busy season to some extent. I've been doing a lot of virtual events. I don't know about those virtual events. I was so full with them, to be honest, but I've been doing a lot of virtual events. So
now let me ask you about that, because when you go to these events, I've been to a few conferences with you, and you wouldn't say it, but you're usually the top attraction in a lot of these, and you make a point of talking to every single person after your talk. Are they able to pin you down in a virtual setting like that?
So this is the problem, okay? This is, you basically nailed my problem with virtual events. So I go to virtual events not to deliver my talk. I go to virtual events to connect, to deliver my talk, and then to connect to the people that are interested on my talk. Mm-hmm. Now, doing this over in a remote fashion, it's completely different. So my typical doing virtual events, it's not participating in the event. It's typically doing a recording, sending a recording out, and then participating in some form of Q&A or some other discussion, or even maybe just engaging on Twitter with the audience. That's it. So it's a completely different feeling. And to be honest, I can't wait to be back on the floor at a real world event and start connecting again with people.
I agree. I think I've been to some virtual events. I'm hosting or participating in a panel in a couple of weeks here, and it's just not the same. I think we can work very well remotely, and I do want to talk to you about that because you've experienced some very extreme remote working situations. I don't feel like the events are quite there yet. I don't feel like we get the same the same level of interaction.
No, we don't. So from my point of view, we don't. So great. It's that's the problem. So I don't get the same thrill on my spine for it.
Yep. Well, so hopefully we're back soon. Hopefully we're back to getting together soon.
Yeah. But again, the most benefit for me was meeting people. Mm-hmm. So I still meet people on Twitter and social media in general, on LinkedIn, because of my activity at conference, but these mostly come in the form of, I am posting what's the name? I'm posting a video, mm-hmm. and then people react to my tweet, and then they ping me over Twitter, or they send me DMs. My DMs are open, by the way. And then we can start chatting, discussing, and then becomes an interesting conversation, and then I met somebody.
Well, that's great that you have that option where you can get the virtual interaction.
Yes, but it's at an in-person event, I could maybe connect with 100 people, 50 to 100 people in the span of 2-3 days. In these settings, in order to reach the same volume, I need to participate in way more events. They might watch my talk, but they may not be interested, or just, you might watch it while doing something else, working or whatever. So they get a little less of that. I don't know.
Awesome. So first of all, your day job is with a firm called NearForm, who I've done some advisory work. I love what you guys are doing. Can you tell the listeners what NearForm is?
NearForm is a professional services company in software engineering. We help companies design, build, and scale software solution, usually based on the web platform, namely JavaScript. We use JavaScript, we use Node.js, we use things as infrastructure as a service. Then the only bit that we don't do that is JavaScript related is Python for some ML, AI, data management, and so on, because that's the winner in that space. But apart from that, it's mostly JavaScript. We also do some mobile work using a technology called React Native, which allows us to do cross-platform. This also means we do a little bit of Swift and a little bit of Kotlin. but not much.
Awesome. How did you find NearForm?
How did I find? How did I join NearForm?
Yeah. Were you contributing in the community and
Oh,
they
so
found
okay,
you?
this is fun. This is fun. Okay, this goes back to 2013. 7 years, 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago now. 8 years ago. Okay, this is 8 years ago. And I was doing I was a guest PhD student. I was visiting the University of Galway at a research center called Derry in Galway, Ireland. And I was doing some research on the Internet of Things. And it was phenomenal, to be honest. And I had such a great time over there. I love Ireland. And by the way, I can't wait to be back. I want to go there. However, while I was there, I was also coding a lot, doing Node.js code, especially because all of my thesis was in Node. Because I was reading all my PhD work was in Node, I was, I was doing a lot of open source with Node.js as well. And at some point, I invented a technique to implement what's the name of this? To implement a graph database on top of a LevelDB. Now, this was probably went into oblivion pretty quickly. But because of that, I started chatting with with some of the core Node people, namely Michael Rogers, Dominic Tarr, Substack, and at that time, Rod Vag, Julian Gruber, I don't know, like plenty of those. So what happened then, which was super fun, was that Dominic Tarr was living at Keanu Maydin's place, which was at the time, who is one of the founder of a company called NearForm. And now, going one step further, Kian, we started chatting on Twitter, and Kian told me, and they said Kian invited me down because he was starting a company and he wanted to hire me. And I told him, look, Kian, I know your NearForm at the time was we were sitting at a small table at a restaurant called The Vic in Tramore. I don't know if you have been to Tramore and you've been to The Vic, John.
I have. I've sat at that table with Ken.
You sat at the table at the Vic. Okay, we were at the Vic, but that was NearForm. You joined when we were way bigger company. We were just a small team. The company was literally at the table.
That's awesome.
And it was less than 8 people at the time. And I joined when my grant from the university. I joined part-time when my grant from the university ran out of money. And I still haven't finished my PhD, so I just joined part-time to finish my thesis.
Okay.
And then I moved up to the next. And then after doing my defense, I just moved to full-time. And I've been there since then.
Okay. Well, NearForm's interesting to me for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is you guys are geographically dispersed. I think there's 22 countries and counting for your employees, maybe more now.
I was guessing 24.
Okay.
But to be honest, I've lost track. Okay. It was very recently that we were interviewing a candidate on. So by the way, we consider both employees and contractors in the total head count.
Sure.
Because of being so distributed globally. In some countries, it's actually very hard to hire directly with good providing with good cost for the employment. So in some cases, we only hire contractors, which are treated the exact same as employees, by the way.
Yep.
But minus a few differences, but very little. The major difference is is because we don't have an entity, or we haven't even figured out a way to hire people there.
Yeah,
Like
24 countries is a lot of countries to set up your true nexus and a subsidiary and a bank account and everything else. So
it's to be honest, is a mess. No, yeah. So it's in some places is we ask people to have their own little personal company and
Yep.
they get invoices too, because it's the only way to manage the heck of that, to make some sense out of it.
Absolutely. I love when I talk to companies, I like to use NearForm as an example of a truly remote native company. I mean, you guys really are, I think, remote native, not a company that's trying to bolt on the remote pieces, but you start with Slack, you start with Zoom, and then.
Well, not true. Okay. Not true. I introduced Slack and Zoom. Sorry.
I meant more when you have a meeting, when you guys hold a meeting, you probably open up Slack and Zoom before people get together.
Yes.
I've been in companies that we tried to do remote, but we'd forget that we needed to start Zoom for the crew in New York, the crew on the West Coast.
Yeah, no, it's we had to. We have an HQ. We had an HQ. I don't know. It still exists, but it's empty. We have an HQ, but it's not strictly needed.
Yeah.
And we had to send people home from HQ, even the people that were local. For two reasons. The first reason they had better bandwidth at home. This is laughing, I don't know. It's the NearForm HQ. It's in this tiny village called Tramor of a few thousand souls, and it does not have a very good internet pipe.
It's what, about an hour long drive from Dublin, if I recall correctly?
It's 3 hour drive from Dublin.
3 hours. Wow. Okay.
It's 3 hours drive from Dublin. So it's and then you can, it's probably for 30 minutes or something from Waterford, which is the closest city, and then 2 hours and a half from there to Dublin. Wow. You can also take the train, by the way. It's an experience on its own. So
I've always had Ollie come get me when I visited Tremor.
Yeah, you see, Ollie, you got the Ollie experience. And by the way, if you ever visit NearForm, if you folks that are listening, if you ever visit NearForm, you should really have the full Ollie experience. It's very important to have. That gives you a completely different new meaning to a trip to Ireland. So it's very worthwhile.
Absolutely. So talking about how remote native you guys are, can you speak to the dynamics in technology and open source that maybe lend themselves to remote collaboration? Because you guys weren't just collaborating remotely because of COVID. You've been doing this since you guys really opened your doors.
Yeah, we have been doing, like, we have nailed the remote collaboration piece. Okay, so there are a few key tenets of how NearForm operates, and now we nailed it. So first of all, NearForm was hit by COVID anyway. We had to change our ways of working. We just needed to change less because we were more close. So NearForm before COVID has always been, given that it was founded in a remote place of Ireland, let's be frank, it had never got to be as much talent as it would need to grow. So from the start, they decided, well, we just get people from where they are. That's the future. So, and we started working with that. So we figured it out, essentially. This is very important. Then the second bit, which is also very interesting, is that this was right about the time where GitHub was starting to become extremely popular. Like Node.js was the first platform that was born on GitHub. And GitHub and open source created a new way of working together. Like, let's consider it. Before then, the best way of developing software was by using some agile techniques. That one of these was a key things of those was the pair programming craft. I don't know if you ever paired with somebody, John.
I did.
It's if people are old enough in the industry, they have been pairing with somebody quite extensively or less extensively to some extent. which means essentially staying shoulder to shoulder with another human being for 4-6 hours a day and sweating together and putting two heads on a task. That's nice, okay? And it's very empowering. It's also, you can actually ship very good quality software in that way. However, that requires literally two human beings that needs to sit next to each other, very close, literally like shoulder to shoulder for 4 to 6 hours a day. It's a lot to ask to a lot of people. And it also requires people to be in the same location.
Yep.
That is the most...
but at the time that I was doing that, the dominant version control wasn't GitHub. It wasn't
GitHub.
It was
yes.
Subversion at the time, and before
yes.
that, CVS. But
yes, yeah. But at the time, those technologies, the only way to do things, because essentially, whenever you were putting something to uploading something, once you were done about it, it was done. Okay, it was. You did not ask other people to review your code. You did not ask other colleagues to say, "Oh, please review it." No, we worked on it together. We are in agreement that this should be done. It's done, uploaded. Okay, and then it was not possible really to merge things. You know, doing branches with SVN. I don't know. It's just
painful.
Like nobody did that, right? So GitHub changed the way of working. And introducing this Git in general, introducing this concept of the pull request, where I could send you some block of code to integrate in your in the code base, and then you could review that block of code. So instead of doing the pairing next to each other, you could review that code on your own time, and then work on it and then reason about it on your own time, completely making development asynchronous. These had two main effects. One is that it enabled more flexible time for developers, and it enabled remote working for devs, because I could work here, you can work in the US, and we can have some overlap in time zone or not. And I can be flexible in the sense that I could take a day off and you could still do your job. Okay. And, it does not require us to be working shoulder to shoulder to be able to develop software. And this was actually pretty good from this point of view. It also had the effect of increasing the amount of work that is a work in progress. So, which is nice, okay, or not, depending. So depending, if you look at on constraint theory or things about Kanban and a lot of those things, it like having a small work in progress, limiting the number of items that you have work in progress is one of the techniques to accelerate delivery. So while this concept while doing this adopting a pull request and so on, had to enabled a lot of things and made the life of our devs web significantly better. It also had allowed for potentially a little bit more delays in and reducing the velocity of the development teams. So it's both ways. Now, you can do things to counteract with that. And one of the biggest things about working remotely, has been the fact that you don't get that sense of camaraderie and team building that you get from working next to each other with some human beings. This is one of the things that was most important for NearForm. So NearForm, we were a remote company. However, we always recognize the fact that we are basically evolved apes, and we hunt in packs, and it's we are social animals. So the reason for that is that we always been what I always called a remote plus playing company. So I always said, well, you can work from wherever you want, but you really want to be next to an airport. or close enough to an airport, essentially. It's because that will become your friend.
Yeah.
It is expected for everybody before the pandemic to be able to travel at least once per quarter. A lot of other teams, like other people, a lot of people traveled way more than that. I was a gold member on a few airlines. You know, it's not nice when that happens. It's not, you don't think, okay, these are, you know, it's not nice. I recently had a baby, and I converted some of my points in the stroller. So just to consider it, you know, I usually use those miles to travel with my family, but because they were expiring because of COVID-19, I converted them and they become a stroller. I don't know if you like, you know,
that's a great investment for sure. So I'd like to shift gears a bit away from NearForm and the remote. We may come back to that later, but you're an expert in JavaScript by anybody's measure. Can you talk a little bit about your history with JavaScript with the listeners?
Yeah, good JavaScript. So I started doing JavaScript in 1990 something.
Wow.
I was doing HTML and at the beginning it was just tables, and then at some point CSS came to be, and then we had some JavaScript for the blinking stuff and doing some crazy things.
So was this before there was even a DOM? Like it was just,
no, I
guess there was always a DOM.
I don't know. It was so many years back. I was a kid. So,
but there was certainly no XML HTTP request object.
No, zero, none of that. You just sent forms, okay? You were, if you wanted to send, you were sending forms. Anyway, so much fun with JavaScript. Then I basically did nothing else with JavaScript for a long time.
Like a lot of people, yeah.
Fast forward 2010, 2011, after Node came to be, I was looking for a platform to build my PhD thesis, and Node was ticking all the boxes because it provided good enough performance. It provided good enough, was good enough. It provided good enough. It provided a really big ecosystem a growing ecosystem of open source software that I could reuse. Now
it has also by then was NPM.
NPM existed, but it was not that big, but it was growing very fast. Right now is the biggest catalog of software that can be reused in the world. So it's that's phenomenal. So NPM is there, but it really showed that level of potential, okay? And then for me, it clicked immediately because before that I was doing Java. And the biggest problem in reusing software with Java was that you could not load two versions of the same library at the same time in the same program. This made reusing software almost impossible.
Yeah, very brittle because of the version controls on the bytecode.
Yes, right? On the packages was all over the place. Okay, so you need things to align next to each other or do some crazy shit with class loaders that I was doing all the time. Like, I'm sorry,
that was my experience. No, that was my experience as well. Was just you spent more time tracking down which class loader in which context.
Yes, exactly. That was my experience with Java. And when I saw Node and I saw NPM specifically, like I came to Node because of NPM mainly, because I saw NPM and I saw that it solved that problem. Like NPM solved the problem of software reusability at scale, to the point that it became the heaviest object in the universe. And you can see that there are multiple 3 or 4 versions of the same library in your Node modules folder for whatever reason. And it's basically like, it's a pit of despair because of how many things are, like thousands and thousands of dependencies just to show a very basic Hello World application that we have these days. Okay, so I'm just pointing this out to you.
Sure.
But that's it has been so successful that it has been a problem for his own success to some extent. Now this has become There is too much reuse to some extent. Like the tool, we are reusing so much that the tools that we are using is not good enough for the level of reuse that we have these days.
So that's on the Node front. Are you a contributor to Node?
I am a contributor to Node. I am a contributor to Node Core. I am really I mostly focus on performance, HTTP, and the generic health of the ecosystem and the project. So
now, do you get much to the front end as well? So React and Vue and those things, or are you mostly spending your time with?
I am mostly all of my code, all my coding time is either a Node or in other open source libraries that I maintain, which, for example, are Fastify Web Framework or Pino the Logger, or other ecosystem stuff. So, or their dependents. So essentially, I am focusing on those areas. Most of my teams do a lot of front end. It's not that I'm not really good at front end, but I can move myself in React and Vue and so on. But and I'm horrible at CSS, so I don't, I've insanely huge respect to all those CSS engineers that can, lay things out perfectly, and I'm just like, it's good that it shows up.
I'm the one who's sitting there like trying 19 things, having no clue what they're going to do.
Yeah, essentially, yes. So I am not the right person to do their CSS, but very likely I'm basically managing as NearForm, I'm a technical director, so I'm managing teams. So yeah,
okay,
that's it.
What do you think it is about JavaScript that's given it such longevity? You mentioned looking at it in the 90s. I had the same experience, and it seems like there were just multiple waves of different things that people are doing in JavaScript.
There are a few things that came to be. First of all, the fact that JavaScript became a multi-company or language. So it became the language of the web, and it have to be maintained and designed by multiple companies. And so it can keep evolving as those companies' requirements are. And this is great because it's the form of one of the greatest form of cross-company collaboration that we see in technology.
I'd like to talk about that real quickly. So how would you describe the management of the evolution of JavaScript? With .NET, obviously Microsoft makes the decisions and they drive it. In the Java world, you've got Oracle prior to that, Sun, but you had this Java community process. And for me, as I got involved in that community and the JCP in particular, at some point, the open source groups just took over driving the direction of because they started moving so much faster than Oracle could or any of the big corporate sponsors. And so you saw things like Spring Framework creating the next standard for EJB or RMI and all these other things that we wanted to do in the Java world, but the open source led with it and then the commercial followed. Is there something, some similar dynamic to that with JavaScript or?
JavaScript is designed by a committee called TC39. There are members of this committee. There are companies that send it. So companies send delegates to these TC39 meetings, and typically it's a week per quarter or something like that they spend together.
But there's no Oracle that owns the underlying JavaScript. It's purely driven by that committee.
Yes, it's purely driven by that committee. It's cross-vendor. Okay. So in order to guarantee that all browsers can run all code, essentially, it had to be. So it's the committee put, I think they have a rule that it doesn't become part of the language until 2 browsers implement this. Oh, wow. So essentially it's, it has to be, it is 2, it literally it's literally cross-vendor cross-company collaboration. And I think this concept, and the problem, this is a trend in maintaining software, because cross-company, how the industry evolved in the last few years has been that we had we moved from big vendors that sold their, like the cost of software grows so much in terms to build software. And you relied so many on new abstraction and stuff that it had, it was to some extent too big for any single vendor. So it becomes zero. It's a little bit a paradox. And you can now download all those phenomenally complex pieces of software that have millions of dollars being poured on every year for no cost at all. They're free. Somebody else is paying millions of dollars to maintain those things, and you'd pay nothing for it because the price for you to pay for it will be too high that it makes no sense. Like you will not pay for it. And so you're paying with something else potentially, because if you're not paying, you're the product, right? But that is how open source work is structured essentially, and how cross-company collaboration work, because it's the residual value of a company owning one of those platforms is so little now that it's better to share the cost between a few of them and just do something better together and compete in other fronts.
That's brilliant. So obviously in the world of open source, Red Hat famously created a hugely successful business model around Linux and later Kubernetes, resulting in the biggest acquisition in the tech space ever when IBM bought them for $34 billion. Why do you think nothing similar has happened with JavaScript? Is it that it's so much bigger than any one community, or is there some different dynamic? Because we're talking about a language, not an operating system.
Sorry, I'm lost. Can you repeat?
So I'm saying Red Hat obviously was able to take open source Linux and build a business model around it, but nobody's really done that with JavaScript, where you say this is the JavaScript company.
Well, it's a few I've tried. So there have been a few companies that tried to be the node company. And a few startups. Some of them have been utterly successful. Some others have been utterly unsuccessful. So there was money being made by people in the Node community. On the JavaScript front, the point is it's so big of an ecosystem that a lot of people are essentially building and like companies just to cater to some very small part of it, because of it has this nature of being cross company. To some extent, the barrier of entry for new companies is actually high. So and this is also super weird to some extent, because it's if companies that can develop new frameworks, new things, like the most popular front-end framework is React. It's built by a dedicated team at Facebook. Like there is a dedicated team of engineers that works in Menlo Park that are probably paid between $200,000 and $500,000 per year each.
Yep.
And there's probably a team of 8, 6, 10, 12, I don't even know many, plus managers, plus the level of investment in this, it's
and you see the same thing with Kubernetes coming out of Google, right? Like there's a team within Google that built Kubernetes, and then they open source it, and everybody gets to take advantage of the advancements there, right?
So yes, exactly. So they just come up with something out of it, and it's great. So and then Google. Well, the Kubernetes story is different. Google have lost the cloud battle, and in order to regain some level of predominance on it, or some level of knowledge, control of where the technology was going, had to open its vault of secrets and share with us Kubernetes. That is the evolution. The story of Kubernetes is really fascinating because it comes from a thing called Borg before, and Google had this thing running for maybe 10 years before it became open source and became something that everybody else could use. So
And that's a really interesting example to me because of my background with Red Hat. I sat at Red Hat World, or whatever they call their global event, when they announced that the third version of OpenShift was going to be built on Kubernetes. And I had never heard of Kubernetes before that, although several of my colleagues had. And I remember a couple of people on my team saying, this is a big deal. And I really didn't appreciate it. But there are people who argue the main thing that IBM bought Red Hat for was OpenShift, and in fact was Kubernetes. And yet it's a technology that was developed at Google and released into the open source world. It's just very instructive to see these things play out.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal. Like the fact that this did not happen with Kubernetes, it's that it's this did not happen with JavaScript. It's completely, well, first of all, it's not that it didn't happen. It did happen. Okay, we have a lot of companies that have built and been created.
Well, React is a great example, right? Or Angular.
Well, yeah, but those are not like, you can make money. You can't make money, or it's very hard to make money out of a JavaScript framework these days. Yeah. So it's people expect the quality that you get for free. It's so high that, you know, you're trying to challenge the ecosystem by getting paid for it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what do? You know, if you're
you're absolutely right, Matteo. We talked about this at Red Hat a lot, because what made Red Hat Enterprise Linux work, yes, you could go get the Fedora bits for free, and they were contributed to on an hourly basis.
Yeah.
But big companies need stable 12 to 18 month release cycles that are tested. Yeah. And then when Red Hat acquired JBoss, the free bits for JBoss worked so well that nobody wanted to pay for the supported bits, because it just works. It's you're fine downloading the jboss.org bits and running that, as opposed to something like Fedora, which is changing so fast. So when a React comes out and it just works.
Yes, that's the key. Like, there is no, it's very hard to create something now. There are a few interesting companies that are, you know, developing a framework and then selling other services. For example, there is Vercel. I don't know if you're familiar with Guillermo Roche company.
I'm not.
It's they built this framework on top of React called Next. It's a framework.
I have used Next. That's the one where you get Vue stacked with Node.
We have you got Next, because it's the copy of Next. Okay. From Vue to React. Next is built on React, and
that's what it was. It was React.
It's a React plus Node, and then they developed a system called Vercel, a company called Vercel, to deploy that combination or any other a combination like that to a serverless based deployment on AWS. And it's actually pretty great, because it made it really, really nice to it made it really easy to deploy those complex applications that before were actually hard to deploy. So
yeah, no, I downloaded it and used it, which told me how useful it was, because I would struggle to deploy a Node and a React application. I just haven't been as hands-on in the code, but with Next, it was very easy for me to build a moderately complex application that a friend wanted to prototype. I thought it had a lot of promise, for sure. I really like your Twitter account. I especially like when you copy in snippets of surprising behavior in JavaScript. Do you have any things or behaviors in JavaScript that always shock people or always really surprise people? I know there's a lot of examples, but are there any that stick out in your mind?
All of them? No, I'm joking. The most interesting, the most problematic one is there are two bits. One is promises. Promises. If you're using promises, you're using them wrong. Promises were added to the language because there were specific needs for them. However, promises were not great in were not great for the type of abuse people have put them through. So it's an abstraction that works, but it can have a lot of side effects, and especially on the in the context of servers. And nobody cares if your browser process crash. You see the ugly face from Chrome and or Firefox or whatever, and you close the tab and reopen the tab and you're done with it. That's what you do with those. Then we have how can I say this? We have them in Node, and in Node, you're not serving just one user; you're serving a multiple of users,
yeah.
all of them. This changes completely the dynamics, and you want reliable code with Node. You don't want that reliable code. You don't. It's not like the fact that it can crash, or like if you make a bug, it can crash everything. Means that you lose all the data that is being processed by all your users. So it's bad. And this is a major difference between those two thinking of the browser versus the server, and the level of stability that is needed. And a lot of the early promise work did not take this into account. So promises were built with this concept of fire and forget. However, fire and forget does not really work well for servers as a topic. You know, if fire server, you want deterministic behavior to some extent, and you want to keep track of, avoid memory leaks and a lot of those things. That's it, really. So that's the that's the nature. That's the point. The other one that was really, really bad for me was what's the name? Was ESM, the ECMAScript modules. This was horrible, and I'm so sorry to say this. This was horrible. This was done before there was before there was the new stage system for developing JavaScript standards, and it was the standard for the ECMAScript modules, which is the import and export syntax for JavaScript, was standardized before there was even an implementation of it. And this was extremely bad. So in fact, the part of the reason why now we have a stage system where you need multiple implementation for something to be part of the standard, it's came to be because of those fiasco. And the reason it took so many years to ship them was because that specification was a hell of a problem.
Well, that's instructive. I think anytime you spend too much time defining the standard without getting into the implementation, we see that expensive mistakes can be made.
Yep, exactly.
So you've obviously created a lot of successful frameworks. You mentioned a handful of them, and I know I've seen others. What advice do you have for people who want to get involved, either in working with these frameworks or in creating their own?
First of all, start with a community. So, okay, if you want to create a new one, start with a community. The community is the most important bit of an open source project. Let me be clear. It's the complexity of the modern open source is that you cannot develop something on your own at your table. You need work for you need others in terms of input, in terms of bug reports, in terms of fixes, in terms of like the complexity are so big that you can't take it all alone. So that's what you need. You need a community. You need people to join you in your journey. That's it.
And how do you build that community? Is it when you see people commonly having similar issues that they're talking about on Twitter or on some other moderated
that's
places?
what I've done it. Okay. Also, you can find you want to find a problem space where you can find another human being. So you have an idea for something like you can have an idea for an open source project. It can either be something very small that's just a library, and you just post it online. You do it, you post it online. Bye. In terms of a framework and something that you want to generate a move, you want something to grow, you need a community. When you need a community, you just you need to have a problem space. You need to find a problem space that is worthwhile for you and for others. So once you find that problem space, you probably can find somebody else that have the same sort of problems that you have, and then start working with them on that problem. And to some extent, it's similar starting minus the business part and the money. So
yep. And going back to the discussion about why all of these events are so important. And again, I mentioned I've been at events where you talk to 30 or 40 developers after you go through your presentation. Is that part of that process? That's finding the community and figuring out what are the problems that people are solving?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. So especially at events and during consultancies and so on. So yeah.
That's great. Do you have any thoughts on where you see JavaScript going in the next 1 to 3 years?
ESM will become predominant way of developing JavaScript. We will see React asserting its predominance in it will become the predominant way of building software on the front end, likely, unless there is some new frameworks that take over the crown. I don't expect it to be, but we'll see. And that's it for me.
Awesome. So you, oops, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and there's going to be way more work on way more interesting things related to edge development. So we are starting to see that Cloudflare workers is a phenomenal concept. We can run code inside the CDNs all over the globe. Like, consider this for a second, because it's it's phenomenal. So we can actually run code distributed throughout the globe. So we can really distribute computation and do certain magical things that we could not do in the past. So those deployments are the ones that are fascinating me more in this. However, I am very committed to Node.js and the rest. I think Node.js is probably the best technology right now to develop any backend application. So that's it.
So you posted a tweet recently about corporate JavaScript users that only take from the community and not realizing that they can and should contribute. Can you speak to why this is important and why you think so many corporate managers aren't encouraging their teams to contribute back and they just take?
So I've seen recently some exec complaining about the quality of Node.js or others, and I'm not. And then they don't they don't put any money on the maintenance of the platform, thinking there is some there are little bees that maintain it for them. So if you are using Node, if you're using Node in any form, which means if you're using React, if you're using Vue, if you're using any of the modern front-end tooling that requires Node to be healthy and for them to exist, and you're not putting money into the maintenance of that ecosystem, you're doing something wrong. So it's you're basically essentially stealing from the community. So if you just reinvest just a little bit, a tiny bit of the money that you are making out of those framework, and I'm talking about the big companies, sure, that have hundreds, if not thousands, of developers working on those tools. If you just I don't know, I'm allocating one developer out of 1,000 to Node Core or to the ecosystem, you will make such a huge difference for the community and not much for your bank accounts.
Well, and it benefits you because you have a seat at the table now on driving the direction, right? Or you it seems like you have a bigger seat at the table if you are contributing resources into the effort. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. So I'm going to let you go here soon. I know you're 6 hours ahead of me since you're coming to me from Italy.
Yeah. So my daughter is kind of reclaiming my wife's attention in the other room. I don't know if you can hear her. But,
I heard earlier, but that's a sign of the times.
Yes. So it's I can't, I can't do very much about it. So hopefully
before I let you go though, you recently started a newsletter. Can you just talk a little bit about what your newsletter is?
So my newsletter, you can find it at Nodeland.dev. It's I write about my what I develop in open source. So essentially, I write about what I am currently working on in the open source world. I talk a lot about Fastify. I talked a lot. I write a lot about Pino, Node Core, a few on the content that I produce every week. So it's pretty
awesome.
Nice.
I'll link to it in the show notes. You said it's nodeland.dev. Yeah.
Awesome. Nodeland.dev. Yes. Okay. So it's adventures in Nodeland, and it's a reference to the first NodeConf, where at the first NodeConf, Kian said, "Welcome to Nodeland," and it's a reference to that. And at the first NodeConf, we were all staying on an island, in a castle in an island. So wow. It was pretty magical. That's it.
Got it. I'll add a reference to NodeConf as well, because that's a conference that NearForm is they birthed that. Is that
yes,
correct?
I'm part of the team maintaining it. So
awesome. Well, look, Matteo, I know you're busy, so I won't take any more of your time. But thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, with any expert, but especially with you. So.
Well, it was quite a nice thing. So hey, thank you.
All right. Cheers. Take care.
Bye, John.